Bravo, request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa Uniform 259er, 119er, break. Enemy is unaware of our presence at this time, over. Solid copy. Hitman 2-3, Echo 5.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. My guest today is Mr. Paul Fisher. He's an alumni of the 82nd Airborne Division, the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam. He's an 82nd Signal alumni, and I'm really excited that we're going to get back to talking about Airborne Signal today. So, Mr. Fisher, welcome to the show.
It's glad to be here, Ben. I'm delighted that you asked me to do this.
So what I'd really like to do real quick, we had a brief discussion before recording, just kind of laid out how your career went, but I'd like to lay out for the listeners really quick your resume, if you will, from the time you were commissioned through your time with the 82nd, the 173rd. Just kind of give them a timeline, and then we can start discussing various episodes of your career.
Okay, well, once I was commissioned, I was on orders to report to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I did and attended the basic officer signal course there. I graduated from that successfully and was scheduled to go to Fort Sill, to probably the best commo school in the Army for tactical comms, at least in those days it was. The Signal Corps tried to get it from Fort Sill, but the artillery fought that off. And so I reported the 4th of July, 1968 to Fort Sill and attended that comm course there. After that, I drove across country to Fort Benning, went to jump school. And then on the 26th of October, 1968, I reported into the 47th Airborne Engineers at the 12th Support Brigade Airborne. And I spent from October to April there, took a month's leave, and then reported to Fort Ord, California. Fort Lewis, Washington, and took an airplane to Vietnam to the 18th Engineer Brigade, and was assigned up country in the mountains to Dak To in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. I got to the 934th Engineer Group, and they had a Signal Corps major there who was begging to get out of there and was going to recommend me as his replacement because they had a 292 laying on its side and wondered why they couldn't talk FM more than across the wire,
Yes,
so
sir.
I got a 30-foot telephone pole installed, and they thought I was a miracle man. And I even showed dummies how to climb a telephone pole.
And I'm guessing you were a first lieutenant at this point, or still?
I was the first lieutenant. Yeah.
Hey, so there was a major who was so anxious to get out of there that he was willing to be replaced by a first lieutenant.
Well, they had a security platoon there, and they didn't have a platoon leader. They had a sergeant, and they had a couple of ACPs in that platoon, and they also put out listening post and ambush sites at night out from Engineer Hill outside of Pleiku near Campanari, where the 4th ID was. And they had the radio go down once, and I said, hey, why don't I go along in case you have a problem? They said, okay. So I'm riding across this terrain in the Central Highlands in an APC with its lights on at night, thinking, what the hell are you doing? A moving target out in the Badlands. And so when I came back the next day, the XO of the group said, would you like to stay here and be the platoon leader of this fast reaction platoon? And they said, you could get the CIB. And I wasn't so much interested in the badge, but it was the first of 2 times I was offered to do that. And I said, sure, I'll be glad to do the job. I think I could have a lot of fun and learn a lot here. My battalion commander from Dak To came down raising hell that I was his commo officer, and they were under duress up there. And so I went off to Dak To and did my stint up there with the Dak To defenders. They were in a magazine, in Life magazine, and was awarded the Valorous Unit Award for our combat action. We were the last U.S. combat battalion north of Kon Tum in Vietnam.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
It was a major bypass route to come down through the highlands and onto the beaches of central Vietnam. And that's where tanks were firstly introduced by the NVA up at Ben Head, a special forces camp north of us.
Yes, sir.
We
So
got a new, sorry,
please finish your thought.
we got a new battalion commander, and he was introduced to me as this is Lieutenant Fisher. He's our perimeter defense officer. Didn't say commo officer, and I said commo officer. And he said, "How come you got the job?" I said, "Because I'm a paratrooper, sir." That's what Colonel Howard told me. So I said, "Well, I'll let you know whether you're going to continue to do that." Roger that. Rockets and mortars started hitting the ground. And I said, "Sir, here's the radio. Would you like to take charge? Why don't you go ahead and let me watch you, and we'll go from there."
So I imagine you kept the job.
I kept the job.
Roger that.
And on my OER, he wrote, he was shocked to find out the responsibility given to the commo officer, First Lieutenant Fisher.
Good on you. So did you spend your entire tour that in Vietnam, that tour with the engineers?
No. When he got there, he came from West Point as an instructor. Nice guy. I forget his name, but I put in a 1049, and I was the first of 9 officers that were requested to leave. And since I knew the brigade commander and the XO who offered me the security platoon up at Pleiku, they asked me, "What's going on?" I said, "Sir, I'm a tactical communications officer. You know, not complaining, sir, but you combat engineers hop in your dump trucks, drive 40 miles, and expect to talk on an FM radio that goes 5 miles, unless you're on top of a hill.
Roger.
And if you got any trees in the way, you're not going to talk 5 miles. So I'd like to get with a rifle battalion and do what I've been trained to do." Got my 1049, my transfer to the 173rd, reported up to brigade. The signal officer said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at LZ Uplift." So I hitched a ride off at LZ Uplift. The guy dropped me off on his way by, and I walked in with my duffel bag. And that night I met the S3, invited me to the top for a beer, and it was like a cave. And his name was Don Solon, Major Don Solon. And he asked me my background. I gave him just no A, B, C, D, no nonsense. And he told me what he expected of me. "Yes, sir." He said, "Do you have any questions?" "No, sir." He said, "Are you finished with that beer?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, take it with you when you leave." And I remember walking out thinking, what the hell have I gotten myself into? And it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
So
we were friends for 40 years.
That's amazing.
He got cancer and died.
And I'm sorry to hear that, but it's
Yeah.
amazing the friendships that you can form in a good unit. That's for sure. They're definitely lifelong.
He got relieved from battalion command in the 1st Armored Division. And he was 200 miles away from the rifle range, and there was a firing accident on the rifle range 200 miles from where he was. And the division commander called all the commanders together, all the battalion and brigade commanders, and said, "I just relieved the finest battalion commander in the Army. None of you are safe."
Responsible for everything the unit does and fails to do. That's for sure.
He went back to Fort Bragg, helped organize SOCOM, made 06. He should have been Chief of Staff of the Army, but
wow,
that wrecked him. That's the caliber of guy he was, and he looked like a Harvard professor. He went to Texas A&M, and did not like Aggie jokes.
None of them do, sir. My daughters are proud Aggie.
So after the 173rd, I only extended 1 year. I did not want to come home a lieutenant. And I was hoping I was going to be promoted to captain because I had, 2 combat OERs in my file.
Roger.
And so I came down on orders to go to Fort Hood, Texas, to the 3rd Signal Brigade. That a guy by the name of not Leo Childs, he was in shape. Pete Kine was the ADSO when I was the Alpha Company commander for a few months. So I knew him when he was a brand new major. And he became, you know, a 3-star general, as you know. I forgot where this was leading me, but
you're saying you'd extended and you had orders for Hood.
And I told my battalion commander I wasn't too excited about that, and I just, you know, resigned myself to it. And I was supposed to be promoted while I was on leave. And we had a staff meeting one night, and my name was 10. They didn't call us by our names, call us by the suffix of our call signs.
Yes, sir.
Like Solon's was 18 Golf. I called him 18 God. He used to get mad at me doing that. But anyway, mine was 10, and 10 in Vietnam is number 10, and that's pretty bad. You're the worst.
Yes, sir.
So they'd say 10, get your ass up here. So I went up, and he said, "Do you think I was going to let anybody else promote my commo officer?" And he promoted me. He pinned captain's tracks on me about 2 weeks before I was supposed to get him.
That's awesome.
And so
what a great memory.
And then he handed me a letter, and it was from Milpersen saying, "Dear Colonel Lowry, please be advised that Lieutenant Fisher will not be going to Fort Hood, Texas. Based on your letter telling us what a great infantry commo officer he was, please advise then Lieutenant Fisher that he'll be reporting to the 82nd Airborne Division, 82nd Signal Battalion."
That's fantastic.
That's where I went.
And the rest is history.
Well, everything in my life that happened to me as an adult Army officer was because I was a combat paratrooper.
Yes, sir. That's a weighty title for sure.
And then the fact that I was older, because I was 25 when I graduated from college. And when I got to the 173rd, the sergeant major, his name was Bobby V. Teague, who was the youngest command sergeant major in the United States Army. And he was a command sergeant major for 17 years. That's how long.
Oh my goodness.
That's how young he was. And he's walking down the you know, we're on the LZ at Uplift, and he said, "Hey, sir, I just want to let you know something." I said, "Okay, Sergeant Major, what's up?" He said, "You know, I outrank you." I said, I didn't read that page in my officer's guide. Tell me about that." So, "Well, I'm a captain in the reserves." I said, "That's fantastic, Sergeant Major. I think that's great. I'll tell you what, I'll be saluting your ass day and night when you're wearing captain's tracks on your collar, and be glad to do it. But until that, I think that you owe me a salute, Sergeant Major, whether you like me or not." And the next day, I got invited to the senior NCO's hooch. They thought I was an E6, at least an E6 who had gone to OCS, because how long were you in the Army before you went to OCS? And I said, the first sergeants were all there checking you out, and the sergeant major, I had told him I wasn't going to salute him because he used to do that to all the lieutenants. And so I was okay with them. They thought I was one of them.
That's
but
awesome.
I was raised by an NCO and an officer who was probably the meanest SOB on earth.
It's amazing what that combination of upbringing, if you kind of came up in a family that understood the military, and also just that extra 3 years you had before commissioning, the maturity that takes place in any young man's life in their early 20s, it just provides so much seasoning. And that must have been a tremendous advantage of you once you actually got to a combat unit, just to have that extra experience of life, period.
Yeah, well, my father was a first sergeant after he resigned his commission. And so we had police call in the morning and he would check. And I saw him one day go out and he would take 3 matchsticks and throw them in the yard.
And you better find them, right?
Yeah. And so when I saw him do that, I got a rake. And then he saw me raking the yard once, and he never asked me, "Did you police up today?"
That's awesome. And your dad, you had told me before you hit recording, your dad was an alumni of the 11th Airborne Division.
Yes, he was in the 187th Regimental Regiment as a platoon leader. I have his orders downstairs in my records.
So was did he do the traditional, like, enlisted, hit OCS, platoon leader, then reverted to an NCO rank after the war? Or what was his progression?
His brother and his brother-in-law were in the National Guard in the New York, the Yankee division, I guess they called it. And they had him take the test, and he passed the test for officer candidate school, and he was commissioned as second lieutenant infantry.
Okay.
And off he went. We got to Fort. Now, I've been an Army brat since I was, born. On my birth certificate, it says occupation of your father, and it says professional soldier. On my son's birth certificates, it says occupation of your father, and I wrote professional soldier.
I understand. So anyway, we get you through Vietnam. You're on orders to Bragg. You go to 82nd Signal. I know that you commanded Alpha Company.
Well, I started off as the S4.
Well, let's take it from there.
They didn't expect me. And so I reported in, had my business cards, my officer cards all done, ready to report. Where do you want me to hang my hat? And the battalion commander said, "You wait out there." And then 10 minutes later, here comes, listen to me talking about a chubby guy. Here comes this chubby guy in glasses. Look what I've become, And he brings us both into the office, and he said to the one guy, he says, I forget his name. He was the S4. He said, "You're relieved. You're his replacement. Any questions?" And I said, "No, sir. I'm assuming that my staff boss is the XO." "Yes, he is." So I went in and saw the XO, and I think he was just made the height limit for airborne school, but I didn't, I knew it was supply. That's all I knew. But I had two of the best warrant officers in the division. One was Davidson and one was Brown. And Davidson was the warrant officer selected to do D-logs, to go from a manual property book to computerized. You don't think the 82nd Signal Battalion's property was in order and first rate? You're damn right it was.
That's awesome. How long were you there for?
I was only supposed to be there 6 months, and I was supposed to get Bravo Company. And as it turned out, the general's aide was a guy by the name of, was a signal officer. And he was an airborne ranger, handsome guy, about 6'3". I mean, I'd like to date him. Nice fella. And the general asked him what he would like to do after being the aide. And he said, "I'd like to go to the signal battalion and command a company." There were 3 signal companies in the division in those days. Headquarters, Alpha, and Bravo.
Roger.
I had 234 in my company alone, in Alpha Company. 2 command ops platoons, a radio platoon, and a auxiliary platoon, I'll call it. So anyway, he got Bravo Company, and the first sergeant and I were planning what we were going to do when we got together, because the battalion commander told me I was going to get the Bravo Company. And then he got it. So the battalion commander, name was Hal Demick. I went through 3 battalion commanders. Bill Klingenpeel, whose son later on commanded the battalion.
Yes, sir.
When I got there. And then Hal Demick, who was a Norwich graduate, military school. And then Bobby Gainey, who was an old combat engineer from World War II.
Oh, wow.
And that was a trip with him. But I went through 3 battalion commanders and 3 division commanders.
How long were you with the division at that time to go through so many?
I got there in April of 1970, and I went to the advanced course in October of 1972.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot of turnover during that time.
Well, it used to be 6 months and you got turned over.
Wow.
I was supposed to get Bravo Company, but they extended command because it was stupid every 6 months doing a complete inventory of a unit. It just threw everything. And so you got a year's command.
That which makes a lot more sense. I mean, I remember being in command. You barely have your feet under you after 90 days, and you're already halfway through your command at that point with 6 months. That's crazy.
The day after I assumed command, I had a race riot.
Oh my goodness. Which actually leads me into a question I was going to ask anyway, because this is the 70s and there was definitely a lot of tension. So what was the atmosphere like in the division back then in terms of, race relations?
Volatile. When the 3rd Brigade went to Vietnam, they took all the dirt bags from all the other units and made the 4th Brigade to have 3 brigades while the 3rd was in Vietnam. But they gave everything to the 3rd Brigade to make them deployable.
Yes, sir.
And so there was conflict. We were going to a volunteer army. There were racial issues coming to the fore. Martin Luther King got killed. A whole host of things. But I had a lot of fabulous soldiers, regardless of color. All 4 of my platoon sergeants made command sergeant major.
That says something.
My first sergeant made command sergeant major of CTAF that became the 173rd in 2000 when they reactivated the 173rd. So I had 5 NCOs who were the best in the division. The Signal Battalion won everything. We won the 10-man parachute contest. We won the marksmanship contest. We won the division marching contest every year when we had the pass-in review.
Yes, sir.
We won it 2 years in a row. And Colonel Demick was told that we won it the 3rd, but they would have the chief of staff said the infantry guys would have had a nightmare if the Signal Battalion had won the marching. He was never so mad in his that I ever saw him. And that we won it, but he had to give it to somebody else.
That's completely understandable. Did
won softball, we won basketball, just everything.
And a winning culture like that goes a long way. I imagine that it translated over into your soldiering, into your technical skills. It just, people striving to do their best in whatever they're turning their hand at. Is that what the culture was like, do you think, despite the volatility?
It was just, they were all volunteers, really. They were volunteers. First, they had to volunteer for jump school, and then they had to volunteer to stay in the 82nd Airborne.
Roger.
And the 82nd in peacetime is don't walk on my grass. I mean, it was a straight lace unit. I had several guys from my commo platoon in the 173rd who came to Fort Bragg, and they called me up looking for a place to go to get out of the unit down that they were in. One guy got court-martialed and run out of the Army, and he just couldn't cope with being back in what we call the world. The day that after the riot took place, the assistant division commander, a fellow by the name of Shai Meyer, big, tall, thin guy who became chief of staff of the Army.
Yes, sir.
Came down to my company, and we had a meeting, and everybody came together, and they had a full and open discussion. And at the end of the meeting, he came up to me by myself and said, "Captain Fisher, you're going to be able to handle this?" And I swear to this day, what I said to him was, "Sir, if I'm not, you're going to fire me. And I don't plan for you to fire me, sir. I've got the best NCOs in the division, and we're going to make this right."
Awesome.
And the first thing I did was have every single platoon leader and officer in the company at 4 o'clock when their soldiers woke up. So the whole year that I was there, we were in the company on their floors, walking around the whole time. And we normally didn't leave till 7, 8 o'clock at night if we weren't on an alert, because we were alerted to Korea. We were alerted to Turkey. I sent a platoon to Turkey. we were just always going somewhere.
Yes, sir. That lesson is huge though. But leadership being seen and just being present can handle so many issues before they become actual problems. So that's just, you know, you got to be with your soldiers.
Absolutely. I had a corporal who had the only 3/4 ton truck in the headquarters because he had the air equipment. And when we made jumps, we were the only battalion in the division that did not lose one air item.
Oh, wow.
I'm not saying he didn't steal something every now and then, because my supply sergeant was an absolute trip. I mean, uh, I could go into some real detail, but I told him, do not do anything illegal. I'll string you up by your heels if I find out. Do you understand me? Oh, yes, sir, I understand. No problem. Yeah, right.
I'll just make sure you don't find out, sir.
So I took command, and I just had a marvelous time. I had a wonderful time. I spent a lot of time with my troops. I talked to them. I went out and sat down in a crowd with them, and I said, let me have it. Because you got to be able to take it if you're going to give it out.
Yeah, Roger
And
that.
I said, and I told them all, I said, I fight back. You know, so you're not going to roll over me. And those were the days that the Army made it easier to get rid of malcontents. When they changed the regulation, you could get rid of a guy in 45 days, and
Oh, wow.
Some sooner.
And did you find you had to call the malcontents, or you know, because you said you had the double volunteers and you had these great NCOs. So did you have a large crowd of folks you needed to separate, or were they few and far between?
I had 4, and one guy was after me, and so I had 4.
That's fantastic. That's a very low number out of a 200+ man company.
I spoke to every soldier who came in one-on-one and told them this was a hard unit. This was a tough unit. My company clerk was a college graduate with an English degree. He was an 05 Bravo. I thought he was going to cry when I told him he was going to be my company clerk. I said, yeah, but you're also going to be on the division commander's jump team. How's that?
There you go. That's where an 05 Bravo wants to be.
What a stud muffin he became, you know, because I let him do his job, but during the day, you know, he was in that orderly room being the company clerk. So we were pretty squared away. I just had super soldiers. And I discovered if you take care of them and you can BS them, but you got to back it up. And if you take care of them, they're going to take care of you.
Yes, sir. That's the ultimate leadership lesson. That's the ultimate lesson of command right there.
You have to prove yourself to them.
Roger that. In the culture of the division at that time, you know, you got there in 70, you said you stayed till 72. I imagine, and maybe it's an erroneous impression, did you have a high percentage of combat veterans? Were guys rotating back from Vietnam, or did you find that you were being staffed by people who did not have multiple tours or any tours?
Only the NCOs were a lot of my NCOs were combat veterans. They did they called it the Golden Triangle. They'd go to Fort Bragg, to Fort Campbell, to Fort Lewis, to Fort Bragg, to Fort Campbell, to Fort Lewis, and they all knew each other.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They were all signal guys. So they were in the signal units the 9th Division, the 7th Division, you know, the 101st and the 82nd.
Tracking.
And so they were just the best. And I backed them up too.
So all your young, yes, sir. So all your young troops coming from AIT and jump school, they went straight to the 82nd.
Most of them did.
And platoon leaders, was that the same basic course jump school and then wound up in the division?
I had my share of West Pointers. West Pointers every year you get a whole new crop of West Pointers from at the 82nd, because everybody wants to come to the All-American division. And so I had I had 7 lieutenants. It was a big company. My TO&E didn't allow for 7 lieutenants, but I had 2 OCS kids who hadn't even been to jump school yet. And the picture I sent you of in formation, passing in review.
Yes, sir.
There's a little guy on the left. Looks like he's, he's short. He was the 2nd lieutenant that won the division push-up contest. We won everything. We won everything. And it has nothing to do with me. It was them.
That's awesome. So 7 lieutenants, that's like a mini battalion.
It's an awful pain in the ass when you get a phone call and it's one of your supply lieutenant, and he's in jail in Fayetteville, and he had just shot his roommate in the head.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's a major you know what?
I imagine that took a lot of your time for the next few weeks.
Well, first call was I didn't call. I drove over to the battalion commander's house and told him, and then I went down there. They released him to me. They had been drinking. They lived out in the country outside of Fort Bragg. They were shooting with a .22. One guy was laying on the couch, and the other guy was the lieutenant that held the pistol. And the other guy reached over and said, "Hey, let me have that," and pulled on the barrel.
Oh.
And put a round right through himself.
Oh my gosh.
And I met his parents, and all the platoon leaders at their own call attended the hearing, and it was an accidental death.
What a shame. But it just shows you the craziness, the things you don't expect to encounter when you're in command. You never know what's going to happen. You see the whole human condition.
Yeah, the biggest fun is getting a call by the S1 saying, "Hey, Paul, the general's going to run with your company tomorrow." And General Blanchard ran with every he tried to get every unit, but he ran with one company every day.
That's awesome. Again, another great example of leadership.
Yeah, and he took the guide because there was some smart asses that would take the guide and then try to run his butt into the ground. He wasn't having any of that. He was smart enough to realize that. I wouldn't have done it, allowed it to happen anyway.
Of course. So you had a year in command, and then after command, you went straight to the advanced course?
I went directly to the advanced course. Yeah.
Very cool. And so then you went on to how many years of a career after that? Because I remember you originally said you were just going to do your initial time as an officer, take care of your ROTC commitment, and go to law school. Well,
I put a request in for my RA and was declined. And after I went to the advanced course, I went to Thailand. And I ended up being the S1 of the Signal Brigade. It was a brigade-sized unit, but it was called U.S. Army Communications Command, Thailand.
Interesting.
And we had all the multi-channel radio sites at places all over Thailand. And I'm a social animal, and I play bridge, I play golf, I played tennis. I didn't play at it, I played it. And I think there's a difference. And so I was involved doing that, and I was invited to play golf with my brigade commander and the chief of the Royal Thai Signal.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and you never stood on a tee, and you're ready to tee off, and a vehicle pulls up, and out piles a squad with automatic weapons and a chief of staff of the Army, and they don't even ask you. They just come up on the tee. You step back and say, "Sawadee Kap," and they tee off in front of you, and he's got this squad with him going down the fairway. So anyway, I met him, the chief signal officer, and the brigade commander used me a lot as his S1. I was my wife got him at a party. She said, could you please have Paul home before 9 o'clock every night? And he comes home half in the bag because there was a lot of drinking going on. But anyway, he told me about this organization called Mitrapab, and Mitrapab is the Thai word for friendship. And they jumped out of airplanes, and they charged 5 baht, 25 cents admission, and then they would give that money back to the province, and they would build a school. And when I was in it in 1973 to 75, we were in a 300 school, and it's still active now.
Oh, wow.
And I got to jump with the Thais because they wanted somebody who was jump master qualified, who knew what being a DZSO was, to go out to the provinces every now and then and select a drop zone. Because we jumped in football fields with clongs and high tension wires and jungle on at least 2 or 3 sides every time. We jumped high. We jumped at 3,000 feet, even the static line. And then we used steerable parachutes, and we landed in a crowd of 25,000 people. I had a friend of mine,
awesome.
Dick Keating, and landed on the governor's tent, slid off, stand up, saluted the guy, and said, "All the way, sir, airborne." So anyway, I was in their hospitality committee on the Mitrapab, and I used to go around to the university clubs in Bangkok and give a talk about Mitrapab. And I was dressed in a jump, a colorful jump outfit, and like the Golden Knights, and we had a big badge and all that. And I had a parachute, and I went through the jump commands, and I had a guy, we unfurled it, and we got. And they were all Thai leaders who had been to the university and graduate school in the United States. So I was awarded on orders Thai Master Jump Wings and Thai Border Patrol Wings.
That's awesome.
When I came home, you can imagine several times I had senior officers say a major, and then when I was a lieutenant colonel, it happened to me. Some colonel at the PX said, "Colonel, are you authorized to wear those?" I said, "Well, sir, the truth is I was in an Army-Navy store, and I saw those things, and I thought they looked great on a uniform." So I bought it. "Are you being a smart ass?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm being a smart ass. You want my orders?" I carried my orders for years.
That's awesome. That is so
Have
cool.
you ever briefed at Congress?
No, I have not.
When you go there, they ask you to wear all your bells and whistles. And the way I'll put this is that my people got recognized, and it fell on me. I got recognized as well. So I have a few rows of ribbons, and then I have Thai jump wings, and there's an aguilette that goes with it. It's a red cable, and it's got a gold-plated elephant's head, because that's called the Airborne.
Yes, sir.
It's a sacred elephant that the king rode into heaven, and the paratroopers have it. And so I look like a Russian doorman. And so I went up, going up to brief the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. I forget his name. He was a Pennsylvania guy, famous guy, and I can't remember his name. And I walked in, and I had my jump wings on, my combat patch on, my 82nd patch. No, I didn't have my 82nd patch on. And I had changed jobs. I was in a PM shop then, but I had my combat patch on, and the guy who was his exec was in a wheelchair, and he wheeled himself in. And he looked at me and my uniform, he said, "What the heck happened to you? You get hit by a color bus?" Because I had stuff all over my uniform, Yes, and he spent the first 20 minutes talking about what's that, what's this, where's that, what's that, and the 3 guys that were complaining that I was against competition because they wanted me to select them for a lightweight digital facsimile we had the first facsimile in the Army, was one of my programs, UXC4, I believe it was called, but it was, I call it the Timex of FedEx, because it fell off a deuce and a half, got dragged a quarter of a mile, and it still worked. So I kept on
Keep
ticking.
on ticking.
But he wanted me to, I said, what these gentlemen want to do is they can say that they can name this fax box in no notes. If they show you what they've got made, they'll show you a suitcase with nothing in it. And so I already have 2 logistics chains that I have to keep up with. And now you're asking me to do a 3rd logistics chain. It'll cost 4 times as much as keeping what we've got that works. And I said, what we ought to do is just buy commercial computers, and when they stop working, throw it away.
There you go, COTS. I'm tracking.
And that's what they went to. When they stopped having to go through the testing process that you could shoot it with an RPG, and by that, the technology was changing every 6 months.
Yes, sir.
So by the time you got one hard drive approved, there were 3 generations beyond you.
Yeah, roger that. Everything's changing in 6 months, and you've got a 2-year procurement cycle.
Yeah. But had a great time after Thailand. I wanted to go to the Marine Corps comm school to be an instructor. And my brigade commander, Colonel Cannon, said, Paul, do not go be an instructor. Go be a student and then get the hell out of there. So they had just transitioned the Army System Engineering School from Fort Monmouth to Keesler Air Force Base with the Air Force. And so I went there, but they wouldn't let me stay to get my master's degree. So I went to Fort Monroe on the C&E staff at Fort Monroe for 3 years, and then selected for Staff College. I went to the Armed Forces Staff College, where you went to Leavenworth, right?
Yes, sir.
And please don't call me sir. We're both lieutenant colonels. I mean, and neither one of us wears it on our sleeve, so that's a cool thing.
Yes.
So after that, where did I go? Oh, I went to Staff College, and then I went to Shape Headquarters. And I was on the staff for about 6 months, and the battalion commander asked me to come be his S3. And
Okay.
I became the S3 it's now, after I left, the job changed from a major's job to a lieutenant colonel's job. And the battalion went from they called it Shape Signal Group to Shape Signal Regiment, which is a 06 command billet.
Oh,
there
wow.
aren't too many Signal Corps 06 command billets.
Roger that.
But now it's an 06 command billet. We had nuclear release when I was there. And it's funny, nuclear release. I used 75 word a minute radio teletype to alert that nukes were coming. The nukes would be bouncing off your noggin by the time you got the message in the tape and through the teletype machine. So I had 1950 technology that almost cost my battalion commander his job. But you remember I said I played tennis?
Yes.
Well, I played tennis with Sack Year's exec, who was the #2 guy in his class at West Point, and he replaced his roommate, who was the #1 guy in his class at West Point, who became IG of the Army. My son played basketball with him. But anyway, I played tennis with the guy, and he called me up, raising hell about the secure voice in NATO. I said, sir, you gotta come see this. Because every Monday, SACEUR has 5 phone calls, all 5 in a net from Norway to England, to Italy, to Germany, and Shape. And the equipment that we had, that if anyone spoke out of turn, it broke down the call.
Oh, my.
And you had to reconstruct the call from the get-go. And there were 2 switchboards at each site. So that's 10 switchboards. You went from a secure phone to an unsecure switchboard. to a secure switchboard, to a radio, to a, and reverse it the other way 5 times. 3 weeks after I demonstrated to them, each one of those had a captain in the staff at each one of those, American captain with our U.S. crypto gear, but they kept it in a safe and only brought it out on Mondays because there was no foreign.
Roger.
But they all had them 3 weeks after that demo. When NATO, when Greek was accepted into NATO, I was standing there. There were 5 special colonels that worked on Sakir's staff, and they were whiz kids. And one guy's name was Papadopoulos, I want to say, but I might just be mispronouncing it. But he was talking with the Hellenic Army, and Paul Fisher was standing there showing him how to use the phone in this system because it was a nightmare.
Oh my goodness, that's just a amazing experiences, and just the behind the scenes stuff is always the most interesting. That's for sure, because you're thinking, shape, Sakir, that it's got to be up to date and just the best stuff ever.
I'm standing in the bookstore at Shape headquarters. It's up front of the headquarters, and in walks a guy, silver-haired gentleman, looks like a movie star, and it was General George Blanchard, who was a 4-star who commanded Usurer in front of General Crozen. And he walked in the door, and I was in uniform, and I'm standing there, and I just went to attention, so brought to a salute and said, "All the way, sir." And he broke out in a big smile and came over, and I was a major at the time. I told you that I put in for my RA and was turned down.
Yes, sir.
I wrote General Blanchard and I wrote General Meyer. General Blanchard was 4-star in Europe, and General Meyer was on the Army staff. I think he was the G3. I told them where we met, reminded General Meyer about the racial incident in my company, and that I had successfully completed command, and that I had applied twice for an RA, and the next time I applied, I needed a general officer recommendation, and I was I didn't say wondering, but I'm requesting that you consider writing a letter of recommendation for me, and I wrote a letter of recommendation for as an example, and they both wrote letters for me for my RA. So I laugh and say, I got my ROA when Blanchard got his 4-star and General Meyer got his 3rd star.
So it worked out for everybody. It sounds like. That's awesome.
I was a paratrooper.
And that's what it's all about. We're just about the end of our time, sir. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to share with the listeners?
The one story that I would like to tell is about when I got to the 82nd Signal Battalion. And I was raised by a senior NCO, and my father used to take me on his golf outings, and I'd drag a golf bag for him, and then they'd all drink beer at the end, and I'd sit there drinking Cokes, and they'd be talking about officers, and I paid attention to that stuff because my father did tell me, Paul, listen to your NCOs, they got their heads on right, but don't take everything they say at face value. And I said, yeah, Dad, I've listened to you guys talk after playing golf. I understand that. And so anyway, after the S4 was relieved, I took his job. I thought, I saw the sergeant major in his office. Let me knock on the door and just pay my respects. If he tells me get lost or come back, I'll do that. So I knocked on the door and enter. And I stepped in and I said, excuse me, Command Sergeant Major, my name's Paul Fisher, and I'm going to be the S4. And I wanted to come and pay my respects. And if there's any advice you might like to give me with the NCOs I've got and what you look for in your S4. And he looking at my name tag and looking at me, and he looked like a piece of rope. He looked like an absolute piece of rope. Thin. His name was Clark. I forget his name. And he said, Fisher, I know a Fisher. And I said, well, my father was in the 11th Airborne in World War II. He said, yeah, that name sounds familiar. Well, thanks for stopping by, sir. And if I've got anything for you, I'll give you a call. Off I went. The next day I come into work and my NCOIC said, hey, sir, the Sergeant Major's looking for you. Wants to know if you'd come down and see him. Well, that wasn't a request, but
Roger.
But anyway, he made it sound like a request. So I was there 5 minutes later. And here he had on his desk, you know, one of those paper yearbooks they used to have?
Yep.
And it was an 11th yearbook opened up to the page, and it was the MP platoon that after my father had a platoon in the 187th, he was he was the platoon commander of the MPs. And it said, you know, Lieutenant Roland H. Fisher.
Roger.
And then about 4 rows up, there's Clark. He was in my father's platoon in the Philippines.
That's awesome.
I got back to the S4 shop, and my NCOIC said, who are you? The sergeant major called and said, if you've got a problem with Captain Fisher, you let me know. I'll talk to him. I was in his father's platoon in World War II. I could do no wrong. It was magic.
That's a great story. That's a great way to end. So everybody, this has been Ben Powers coming at you with the Commander's Voice. My guest today has been Mr. Paul Fisher, 82nd Airborne veteran, 173rd Airborne veteran, and just a great All-American. So Paul, thank you very much for joining us today.
God bless, Ben. Thanks so much.